Good morning, students. Today is Saturday, 30 January 2021. This is the second lecture for the week. It should have been posted Thursday, but remember, my goal is to get 2 lectures posted each week, and this is the second one for this week. Probably the first one for next week will be on Tuesday, and I'll try to get the second one up on Thursday. So we'll be all caught up. Okay, we're working our way through chapter 2 of our book by Fred Feldman. Today I propose to cover just one section. The section is entitled Mill's Theory. The name Mill, of course, is John Stuart Mill, and he is one of the more famous utilitarians historically. Before we get to Mill's theory, though, let me touch base with you on some important matters. I have posted a number of handouts, which you will have seen if you've gone to Canvas in the past couple of days. I think I'm about done with handouts for utilitarianism. I had quite a few. And instead of going over them all at one time, I think I'll incorporate them into my lectures. So today, for example, I'm going to go over with you, to some extent, the handout entitled Ethical Terminology. And I'll also, in a moment, mention the handout called Formulations of Utilitarianism. And the others will come up in due course as we work our way through chapters 2, 3, and 4. So make sure you print everything you find on Canvas, put it in your notebook, and study it carefully. Some of the exam questions will be drawn from my handouts as well as from the book. So remember, you're responsible for not only all of the readings from the book, but all of my handouts posted on Canvas and all of my lectures that are given to you by videotape. Okay, why don't you finish reading chapter 2 for next week? We have 2 more days on chapter 2, and that will take us up through next week. So sometime over the weekend or early next week, finish reading chapter 2. I will post chapter 3 in the next day or so, probably today or tomorrow. And then you, if you want, you can get ahead in the reading and start reading chapter 3, which will also appear on the first exam. And speaking of the exam, the first exam will be 19 days from today. It will be on the 18th of February. And 1 week before that, I will post on Canvas what I call a sampling of examination questions. So it'll just be a few questions of each type designed to familiarize you with the type of exams that I give. And I'll do that only one time in the course because after you've taken the first exam, by then you will know what kind of exams I give. Okay, so let's get to Mill's theory. This will be the only section we cover today. In this section, Fred Feldman, the author of our textbook, reconstructs or puts back together, I should say, what he calls Mill's fundamental principle of morality. He says that on page 21. In effect, Mill has a normative ethical theory. He doesn't call it that, but that's what it is. He calls it his fundamental principle of morality, and in a moment you'll see that he also calls it the greatest happiness principle. And he took that term from Jeremy Bentham, his godfather, who was one of the original utilitarians. So let's get to it. Let's read what Mill wrote, and then you'll notice that there are some odd features of his statement of the theory or principle, and we need to figure out what to do about those odd features or oddities. So here's what Mill wrote. Now, Feldman quotes Mill twice for some reason. He quotes him on page 17 and then again 4 pages later on page 21. So here's what Mill actually wrote. Mill wrote in English, so there's no need for a translation. These are the actual words that Mill wrote. Okay, they have not been translated from any other language. Mill said, actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness, period. And then he tells us immediately what he means by the word happiness. He says, by happiness, notice he put that word in single quotation marks, by the word happiness is intended pleasure and the absence of pain, semicolon. And by the word unhappiness, pain and the privation of pleasure. Now, we went over this the other day, and I told you that the word privation is just a synonym for the word absence. And the only reason he changed is, I think, for variety, to make it more stylish and less monotonous. So there are some odd features of this formulation of Mill's. Let's discuss 3 of the oddities. Number 1, Mill used the term in proportion as. Go back and see what he wrote. Actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness. So Mill makes it sound as though there are degrees of rightness, right? He makes it sound as though some acts are righter than others, or that a particular act can be very right, or right in a high degree, or right in a low degree. And to most people, that sounds odd. Most people, including Feldman, including me, find it odd to speak of degrees of rightness. And so we have to decide what to do about this odd feature. Notice that it doesn't seem odd at all to say that there are degrees of goodness. In fact, we have words in our language to reflect that. We say that a particular object is good. Some other object, we say, is better than that one. So better is a comparative term. And we even sometimes say that a particular object is best. We might say LeBron James is the best basketball player. He's not just a good basketball player. He's not just better than one or more other basketball players. He's the best basketball player. So we have good, better, and best. Right? That suggests that goodness is a matter of degree. And the word bad has the same feature. We say that a particular thing or person is bad, someone else is worse, and maybe someone else is worst, W-O-R-S-T. So we have a comparative, worse, and we have a superlative, worst. So goodness and badness appear to be matters of degree. What about rightness? Is rightness a matter of degree? Well, is there such a term as righter? And is there a term such as rightist? Do we ever say that action is righter than that other action? Do we say that a particular action is the rightest act of all? How about wrong? Do we say that an act is wronger than another act? Or wrongest? I don't think in my whole life I've ever used either of those terms until I began teaching this. Right? These are not terms we ordinarily use. Wrong, wronger, wrongest, right, righter, rightist. And that is a good indication that the concepts of right and wrong are not matters of degree. And that makes what Mill wrote very puzzling. So here's what Feldman proposes to do. Feldman proposes to interpret Mill as though he treats rightness and wrongness as all or nothing. An act is either right or it's not right. An act is either wrong or it's not wrong. So let's not use the words right and wrong as though they were a matter of degree. And that means we're going to have to strike from what Mill wrote the phrase in proportion as. We should read Mill as saying actions are right because they tend to promote happiness. Okay? So replace the words in proportion as with something like because. All right, you with me? So the first odd feature of what Mill wrote is due to his choice of the terms in proportion as, and we decided that we're just going to ignore that and treat rightness and wrongness as all or nothing rather than as a matter of degree. Goodness and badness, those are pretty clearly matters of degree. Okay, the second odd feature has to do with Mill's word tend. You see it there? He says actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness. Now, tend is the root of the word tendency. So we have to ask ourselves, do actions have tendencies? Well, go back to the distinction we drew last time. We distinguished between generic acts and concrete acts. A generic act, as you recall, is a kind of act, like walking, talking, telling a lie. A generic act is an act that can be performed more than once. It's repeatable. We contrasted that with concrete acts. A concrete act is unrepeatable. It's a particular act that takes place on a particular occasion. It's performed by exactly one agent, and so on. Right? Remember that distinction, generic acts and concrete acts? Let's apply that now to what Mill wrote. Question, do generic acts have tendencies? Answer, yes, they do. The tendency of telling a lie is to hurt people's feelings or disappoint people. So the generic act of lying does have tendencies. We might say lying tends to cause harm to others. It tends to produce disappointment, frustration, even anger. Now let's ask whether concrete acts have tendencies. A concrete act, such as my lying to a particular person at a particular time and place, has no tendencies. It has consequences, yes, but those consequences are either actual or they're not. Either my act on this occasion has a particular consequence or it doesn't. It doesn't make any sense to say that my particular act of lying to so-and-so on this occasion has a tendency. It either produced a certain effect or it didn't. So when Mill uses the term tend, it makes it sound like he's talking about generic acts. And that would be the natural interpretation. But other things that Mill writes that are not contained in this paragraph suggest the opposite. They suggest that Mill wanted to evaluate concrete acts. And the reason for this is simple. Mill believed, like all other utilitarians, that some acts of lying are right and some acts of lying are wrong. And that suggests that he thinks that a particular concrete act of lying can be right and another particular concrete act of lying can be wrong. So we want to interpret Mill as evaluating concrete acts, such as lying on a particular occasion. And that means we need to ignore his word tend, tendencies. Concrete acts, as I said a moment ago, do not have tendencies. Okay? So we need to interpret Mill as though he didn't use the word tend. So let's try to reinterpret Mill. This is our reinterpretation. Actions are right because they promote happiness. Wrong as they promote the reverse of happiness. So we've gotten rid of the troublesome phrases in proportion as, and now we've gotten rid of the troublesome word tend or tendencies. So notice what we're doing. Mill's language is, it's vague. It raises questions that need answers. So in order to make use of what he wrote, we need to make some interpretive decisions. And I've just told you two of the decisions that we're going to be making. The third and final odd feature of what Mill wrote is this, and this you may have noticed this when you first read it. Mill says, by the word happiness is intended pleasure and the absence of pain. So Mill is telling us that he is using the word happiness with a very specific meaning. Whenever he uses the word happiness, he means pleasure and the absence of pain. That's what it means to be happy. To be happy means to be in a state where you're experiencing pleasure and not experiencing pain. Now that is odd because Mill seems to be equating two things that strike most people as being different, happiness and pleasure. Are those different? They seem to be. For example, When people die and someone gives a eulogy at the funeral, the person who gives the eulogy often talks about the happiness or the happy life led by the deceased. The speaker may say, for example, so-and-so had a happy life filled with various enjoyments and activities, projects, loved ones, and so on. Happiness seems to be a kind of all things considered judgment about a person's whole life. Some people have happy lives. Some people have unhappy lives. And it doesn't have to be about a whole life. It could be about a happy time or period. I'm fond of saying that the 5 years I spent in Tucson, Arizona were among the happiest years of my life. And I've had a very happy life. But those 5 years were extraordinary. I grew up in Michigan in cold weather, and when I moved to Tucson, it was as though my whole world changed. The weather was different. I had mountains all around town, and I got to hike in those mountains and ride my bike out into the desert. There were all different plants, palm trees, and so on. And it was just a wonderful time in my life. So you can say that the happiest time of my life was such and such. Or maybe you had a particularly unhappy period, right? I was unhappy after some incident occurred, and then eventually may have regained my happiness. Okay, so my point is this. Happiness is a kind of all things considered judgment about a whole life or a period of life. You could also say, I'm happy today, right? I'm in a good mood. Things are going well for me and for my loved ones, and that makes me happy. Okay, we talk like that. Pleasure seems to be a different sort of concept. Pleasure is episodic. Pleasure comes and goes. When you eat a good meal or drink a favorite beverage, you experience pleasure as a result of it. Sex is pleasant or pleasureful. Exercising for some people is pleasant, however difficult it may be. It brings pleasure. Pleasure is the sort of thing you can measure. You can always ask for any episode of pleasure. When did it begin and when did it end? And you could try to get the duration of it. You could say, my pleasure lasted 10 minutes or 2 hours. And the same is true for pain. Notice Mill says by the word unhappiness, he means pain and the absence or privation of pleasure. So pain clearly is episodic. Pain comes and goes. Pain starts at a particular time, and if you're lucky, it stops fairly soon, although it may extend over a prolonged period of time. When you go to see a doctor because you're in pain, the doctor will typically ask, when did the pain start? And how intense is the pain? Is another question the doctor will ask you. Is it a dull ache? Is it throbbing pain? Does it prevent you from doing things you would like to be doing? And that sort of thing. So it's odd that Mill, who was a brilliant man, probably a genius by any standard, Mill equated happiness and pleasure, which is strange. Here's what the philosopher Richard Taylor wrote back in 1995. Taylor wrote, Mill sometimes treats pleasure and happiness as being one and the same, and even says that the two words mean the same. This is certainly a step away from precision, for the term happiness is of much wider use, that is far more vague and even ambiguous than the word pleasure. So many philosophers have taken note of this oddity. Why does Mill equate these two things? My theory, for what it's worth, is that Mill, as a utilitarian, wanted something measurable. And I think, in his view, pleasure and pain are easier to measure and quantify than happiness. Happiness is amorphous. Happiness is, as Taylor just said, vague and ambiguous. Ethereal is another word you might use. So happiness can't be measured as easily as pleasure and pain. And since Mill wanted something that could be measured, I think he equated happiness with pleasure in the absence of pain. Okay, so that takes care of the three odd features of Mill's formulation of utilitarianism. Remember what I told you the other day. Mill called his theory utilitarianism. That's the title of the book he published in 1863. Bentham, his precursor, referred to the theory as the greatest happiness principle. So far as I know, Bentham didn't use the term utilitarianism. Mill may have been the first to use that term. But they're clearly talking about the same theory, whatever it's called. By the way, this is a good time for me to mention a handout that I have posted for you. If you have printed everything out, you can take a look at it right now. The handout I'm referring to is entitled Formulations of Utilitarianism. Now, to prevent you from getting scared, I'm not going to ask you any exam questions about this handout. But I want you to realize that there were many different utilitarians going way back in time, and that they all formulated their principle or theory or doctrine in slightly different ways. So I prepared this handout for you to show you the variety of formulations. And I have listed here some of the great utilitarians in chronological order. I begin with the Scottish philosopher Francis Hutcheson. Although he was Scottish by birth, he taught and lived in Ireland for much of his life. Then comes Jeremy Bentham, whom I have mentioned several times. William Godwin, another Englishman. John Stuart Mill, who was Bentham's grandson. Later, Henry Sidgwick, I have mentioned. He was a professor at Cambridge University. He was really the first utilitarian who happened to be a professor of philosophy. Another one is George Edward Moore, who published by his initials, G.E. Moore. And then in the 20th century, Richard Brandt, an American philosopher, the first American on the list. Then another British philosopher, Richard Hare, R.M. Hare. John Harsanyi, that's how you pronounce his name, Harsanyi. It looks like Harsanyi. He was Hungarian. He lived much of his life in the United States after escaping from Hungary. He has the distinction of escaping both Nazis and communists. He fled initially with his wife to Australia and very soon emigrated to the United States. He won the Nobel Prize in economics, and he's a very famous rural utilitarian. Others are John Jameson Carswell Smart, otherwise known as J.J.C. Smart. His friends called him Jack Smart. He was born in Scotland and moved to Australia and lived his life in Australia. Peter Singer, an Australian philosopher who has been in the United States for about 20 or 25 years. Shelley Kagan, an American philosopher, still alive, still teaching. David Brink, another contemporary American philosopher. So if you read over those formulations, it will give you a sense of what utilitarians have in common and how they differ. All of them formulate their theory in slightly different ways. Okay, we're going to focus on Mill and to some extent on Bentham. Let me turn now. I meant to do this at the beginning of class today, but I'm going to slip it in right now so I don't forget it. And then we'll come back to what I call 3 defective formulations of Mill's principle. So let me reach for my handout. I'm now referring to the handout entitled Ethical Terminology. So would you get that out? Just pause the video and get out your handout so you can follow along. I'm not going to simply read it to you. I'm just going to draw your attention to certain things that I say on this handout. Now, the first thing I want to say is that we're going to define the word right in a couple of different ways. We're going to define the word right as permissible. And Feldman mentions this as well. To say that an act is right is to say that it's permissible, it's permitted, it's okay, it's acceptable. And the other thing let's turn to the word wrong. The word wrong means not okay, unacceptable, impermissible. And the second thing I want to say is that we're going to define the word right to mean not wrong. The word right means not wrong. So if I say that a particular act is right, I could translate that as that act is not wrong. To say that an act is right is to say that it's not wrong. And to say that an act is wrong is to say that it's not right. So if you look at page 1 of my handout near the bottom, you'll see that the following 3 terms will be used from now on as though they have the same exact meaning: right, permissible, and not wrong. Those 3 terms have the same meaning. We can say that they're synonyms of one another. And here are 3 more terms that are going to be used in the same way: not right, impermissible, and wrong. So get used to the terminology. Nothing I say on this handout conflicts with what Feldman says in the book. What I'm doing is fleshing out his terminology, and in some cases adding to it. Now turn to page 2 of this handout that I prepared for you. We are now going to define 4 new terms in terms of the words we just defined: right and wrong. Okay, the 4 new words, I'm going to list them and then we'll go over them one at a time. The new words are obligatory, forbidden, discretionary, and dilemmatic. Let's go over them one at a time. What does it mean to say that a particular act is obligatory? It means 2 things. It's a 2-part definition. To say that an act is obligatory is to say that it's right to perform it and wrong not to. And that makes sense, doesn't it? If I say you are obligated to do something, then of course I'm saying that you're permitted to do it. If you're obligated to do it, then you're at least permitted to do it. And remember, we're using the word permitted as a synonym for right. So if you're obligated to do something, we know immediately 2 things. It's right to do it, and it's wrong not to. Okay, so obligatoriness is a strong concept, isn't it? It says more than that it's right to do it. It says, and also that it's wrong not to do it. So to avoid doing wrong, you've got to do it. That's what it means to say it's obligatory. You must do it. It's obligatory. If you look at the footnote for this, it's footnote 3, here are some other terms for obligatory. We might say that an act is mandatory. You're mandated to do it. We could say it's required. We could say it's imperative that you do it. We could say that the act is compulsory. You're compelled to do it. Not by law, but by morality. Okay, so that's the first of the 4 new terms, obligatory. And if you want, you can remember these in a kind of sing-song way. That's how I do it. To say that an act is obligatory is to say it's right to do it and wrong not to. Okay, let's move on to forbidden. What does it mean to say that an act is forbidden? It means it's wrong to do it and right not to. If an act is forbidden, then at a minimum, it's wrong to do it, but it also says that it's right not to do it. You're permitted not to do it if it's forbidden. So let's do both of the first 2 because they're kind of mirror images. Obligatory means it's right to do it and wrong not to. Forbidden means it's wrong to do it and right not to. There's a nice symmetry there, isn't there? Okay, the third term is discretionary. Oh, by the way, there are some synonyms for forbidden. If you look at footnote 5, we could say, instead of saying that an act is forbidden, we could say it's prohibited, morally, not legally, morally prohibited. This is a term Mill used, it's interdictory, it's banned, it's verboten, that's a German word, verboten. We could say that the act is disallowed. We could say it's taboo or condemnable. That's another term Mill used, condemnable. It's to be condemned. Okay, third term, discretionary. A particular act is said to be discretionary when it's right to do it and right not to. Now that may seem strange to you, maybe crazy, but aren't there acts, many acts, that are right to do but also right not to do? For example, what about eating breakfast today? I don't know whether you ate breakfast. I didn't. My stomach's growling. I'm ready to eat lunch already. But a particular eating of breakfast, I think most of us would say, is discretionary. It's right if you eat breakfast, and it's right if you choose not to. Okay? So our lives are filled with discretionary acts, acts that are neither obligatory nor forbidden. It's right to do them. It's also right not to do them. Synonyms for discretionary are given in footnote 6. We can say that a particular act is optional. That means you have an option. You can do it if you want, but you don't have to. Another word is elective. Elective means it's up to you. You can either elect to do it or you can elect not to do it. And we might even use the word indifferent. We could say some acts are obligatory, some are forbidden, some are indifferent, meaning they're neither obligatory nor forbidden. Now there's one more category. We won't say much about it in the rest of the course, but it is possible for there to be an act that is wrong to perform and also wrong not to perform. And obviously you would be in a predicament if you ever found yourself in a situation like that, wouldn't you? A case where you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. Once again, let's call these dilemmatic acts because they put you in a dilemma. The word dilemmatic is from the word dilemma. And a dilemma is a hard spot to be in. Right? You say, ooh, I've got a dilemma. I don't know what to do. Whatever I do, I act wrongly. If I perform the act, it's wrong. If I don't perform the act, it's wrong. Now, obviously, either you're going to have to either perform the act or not perform it. There's no third possibility. And what if it's wrong either way? It's wrong to do it. It's wrong not to do it. Now, there are some interesting terms that we use. If you look at footnote 9, you'll see some of the colorful expressions we have in English. I already mentioned you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Have you ever heard this phrase? You're between the devil and the deep blue sea. Now, imagine being physically positioned between the ocean with waves roaring in and the devil. Right? That's a bad situation to be in. You don't want to go into the sea because you might drown, and yet you've got the devil to contend with on the other side. You may have heard this one. You're between a rock and a hard place. One you may not have heard of, but it has the same meaning. You're between Scylla and Charybdis. Scylla and Charybdis. I think the terms come from Greek folklore or Greek mythology. And here's one that's pretty recent, a few decades old. You're in a catch-22 situation. It's from a novel by Joseph Heller. Catch-22. It's a no-win situation. In fact, pardon me for a moment. I think I should add that to my list, and I'm going to do it right now before I forget. So let me just jot it down here. No-win situation. That's another colorful term for a dilemma, okay, a dilemmatic situation. Now, this may seem silly to you, but I actually have some illustrations that I'd like to show you. You see this? I found these street signs on Google image search, and they perfectly illustrate all four of these concepts. Now, suppose you are driving along in your car and you see a sign like this. Okay, you see a sign like this, and it's either painted on the roadway like this, so you're in this lane where this is painted, and you can see it. Or it may be on a sign directly in front of you as you're in this lane. Now, what does this sign mean? This sign says turning left. According to my video that I'm making right now, this shows the arrow pointing to the right. But I hope that when I post this video, the arrow, you see it as pointing to the left, because it's meant to be a left pointing arrow. And I hope the video isn't messing around with that. Okay, so this is a left pointing arrow. What does this sign mean? It says that if you're in this lane right now, turning left is obligatory. It means it's right to turn left, or permissible. I'll use the terms permissible and impermissible. It's permissible for you to turn left, and it's impermissible not to. Those are the two parts of obligatory. So turning left is obligatory. That's what this sign says. Next one. This is also a left pointing arrow, but this time it has a universal negation symbol superimposed on it. And of course, you know what that means. It means not. It's the negation of whatever is underneath it. If you're in a lane where you see this sign, it says turning left is forbidden. And that means two things. It means turning left is impermissible, i.e. it's wrong to turn left, and it's right or permissible not to. Okay? So it's wrong to turn left and right not to turn left. So this sign illustrates forbiddenness. Okay, what about this one? You've seen a sign like this while driving? If you're in this lane, what is it saying? It's saying turning left is permissible, but not turning left is also permissible, and that would be the straight arrow. Right? Going straight means you're not turning left. So this is discretionary. Right? Turning left, according to this sign, is discretionary. It's right to do it and also right not to. Now, this is not an actual sign. I've never seen a sign with both of these on it. I've never seen a pole with both of these signs on it. Thank goodness, right? Because if you ever saw a sign with both of these on it, it would be giving you impossible directions. It would be saying that turning left is obligatory and it's also forbidden. So it's wrong, it's right to turn left. In fact, it's required, it's obligatory, and it's wrong to turn left. It's forbidden. So this, if it were to exist, would represent a dilemmatic act, right? Where you're wrong to do it and also wrong not to do it. So let's hope you never see a sign with both of these on it. Okay, so read over my handout entitled Ethical Terminology. I add to what Feldman says. I don't contradict anything he says. And now we have a number of resources to use when we're making evaluations of concrete acts. We can ask whether a particular act is obligatory, forbidden, discretionary, or perhaps dilemmatic. And of course, I can test you on any of those concepts, and I will. So read over the handout carefully and I have diagrams on that handout that will help you understand the new terminology and so forth. Okay, we have a few more things to do today, so let me get back to the main text. Let's look at some defective formulations of Mill's principle. And you may be wondering, why would we do that? Why don't we just propose the correct formulation and take it from there? Why go over a series of incorrect or defective formulations? And I think the answer is twofold. First of all, Feldman is teaching you something about how philosophers proceed. Philosophers, like scientists, propose theories. Other philosophers try to find fault with those theories. One way of doing so is to come up with a counterexample, an example that goes against it or counters it. Now, the first philosopher who proposed the theory won't necessarily give up at that point. Many philosophers are stubborn, and maybe that's a good thing. A philosopher will, instead of throwing the theory out and starting over from scratch, the philosopher will modify the original theory in the hope that it will avoid criticism. So the original formulation was shown to be defective. You fix it up and hope that that is not defective. What Feldman does is he proceeds through 6 defective formulations, and he goes into detail about what's defective about them. The 7th formulation, Feldman says, is the correct formulation. It's called U sub 7. So U stands, the capital letter U obviously stands for utilitarianism, and the subscripts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 are to distinguish one formulation from the others. After formulating U sub 7, Feldman considers 2 additional formulations, U sub 8 and U sub 9. And as Feldman explains in the next section, both of them are defective. So, total number of formulations, 9. How many of them are correct? Just 1. And you've got to remember it's U sub 7. That's the correct one. All the other 8 are defective. I hope it's not confusing. Feldman discussed 6 defective ones, then he told us the correct one, and then he considered 2 more defective ones. So, the second reason I think Feldman proceeds this way is he wants to be charitable to Mill. Right? Feldman wants to interpret Mill in such a way that the principle that he ends up with is the strongest it can be, because Mill clearly would want that. If you interpret what someone says in a weak or defective or shoddy way and then find fault with it, you really haven't accomplished anything. In fact, you have committed a fallacy. It's the fallacy, the straw man or straw person fallacy. If you misinterpret someone's argument, you are erecting a person made out of straw. And what is true of a person made of straw? It would be so light you could blow it over like this, and the straw person would fall over. So the lesson philosophers teach their students is whenever you're reconstructing or putting together someone else's argument, make it as strong as you can. Because if you don't, you are setting up a straw person, and that's fallacious. Okay? I know that sounds strange because you want to go after the other person's theory, but really, to be fair, to be charitable, you should interpret that other person's theory in the best and strongest way possible. Think of it as the golden rule. If you formulated a theory, wouldn't you want other people to cast it in the strongest form before they attacked it or criticized it? Surely you would. I know I would. So, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Before attacking someone's theory, make sure you understand it. Make sure you've interpreted it in the strongest possible way. That's often called the principle of charity in interpretation. Be charitable to others. Don't be mean and dishonest. Don't set up a straw version of someone's argument only to then attack it. That's lame. What have you really accomplished if you do that? I've always explained it this way. You could go out right now and find a 4 or 5-year-old child and beat that child up. I'm not advocating this. I hope you don't do it. But you could. Now, you're strong enough to pummel a 4-year-old. But what will you feel good about yourself afterward? I mean, was it difficult to beat up a 4-year-old? Of course not. So you really haven't accomplished anything. If, on the other hand, you picked on someone your own size or larger and beat that person up, then, of course, you have something to brag about. Right? You will have accomplished something meaningful. So don't set up a straw version of someone's argument and knock it down. That's nothing to be proud of. Make that other person's argument as strong as you can, and then, if you find fault with it, you really have accomplished something. All right, so that's what we're up to. Let's do the first 3 formulations today, and then next time I see you, next week, we will proceed through the 4th, 5th, and 6th, and eventually the 7th versions. So today we're going to do U sub 1, U sub 2, and U sub 3, and that'll take us up to the end of the lecture. Okay, U sub 1. Feldman states this on page 21 of his book. Here's how it goes. An act is right, and remember, we're talking about concrete acts from now on, not generic acts. And so let's read it that way. A concrete act is right if and only if the following. It promotes happiness. Now, where did Feldman get that? Go back to Mill's formulation, and you'll see that Mill said actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness. So Feldman took this formulation almost verbatim from Mill. Promotes happiness. Those are Mill's words. So what's wrong with this formulation? Why is this not the correct formulation of Mill's principle? Why is this somehow defective? Well, the main problem with this, according to Feldman, is that it's obscure. It needs to be clearer and crisper and sharper so that we can evaluate it. It's too vague. It's too nebulous. For one thing, what does it mean to promote happiness? Does that mean get as much of it as you can? Or does it mean just get a satisfactory amount? It's not clear. The word promotes is not precise enough, not sharp enough. And what is happiness? Remember, Mill used the word happiness, but then quickly defined it to mean pleasure in the absence of pain. So the word happiness, as Richard Taylor pointed out, is vague. Right? It's nebulous. So this formulation needs to be sharpened up. And that's why Feldman moves on to U sub 2. So let's take a look at it. Page 22. Here is U sub 2, subscript 2, or the second version of act utilitarianism. It goes like this. An act is right if and only if it causes pleasure and the absence of pain. So where did this come from? Where did Feldman come up with this? Well, you probably can see. Mill told us that by the word happiness, he meant pleasure and the absence of pain. So what Feldman did is he struck the word happiness from U sub 1, and he plugged in the words that Mill says are synonymous with it, pleasure and the absence of pain. And one other change took place. Feldman replaced the vague word promotes with the less vague word causes. Once again, an act is right if and only if it causes pleasure in the absence of pain. Okay, so we're getting a little sharper, aren't we? We've gotten rid of the vague word happiness and replaced it with things that are measurable, pain, pleasure, and the absence of pain. And we've gotten rid of the vague word promotes and replaced it with a sharper word. Maybe it's not perfectly sharp, but it's sharper, so that's an improvement. Causes. So what do you think about this one, this formulation, U sub 2? Well, as you may have guessed, Feldman says there's a problem with it. It's still defective. The problem this time is that when you think about it, Is there any act that you or I or anyone else could perform that, get this, causes pleasure and the absence of pain? Is there any act that causes there to be no pain? Now, wouldn't it be nice if you could snap your fingers and cause there to be no pain in the world? Obviously, it would be a good thing, but no human has the power to do any such thing. If there's a God, a certain sort of God, perhaps God could cause there to be no pain. In fact, this gives rise to a famous problem in philosophy. It's called the problem of evil. If God exists and is perfectly good, all-powerful, and all-knowing, why is there any evil in the world, such as pain? Why is there any pain or suffering at all if there's a God who is all-powerful, perfectly good, and all-knowing? If God is perfectly good, then God will do everything God can to prevent evil from occurring. That's what a good being would do. A good parent would do everything in his or her power to prevent his or her child from experiencing pain. Right? So a good God would prevent pain from occurring, and if pain did somehow occur, God would stop it from occurring or end it. If God is all-powerful, unlike a parent, God has the power to prevent pain and suffering. If God is all-knowing, then God knows whenever pain is about to occur and can intervene to stop it from occurring. God knows whenever somebody is in pain. So this is a great philosophical puzzle. It's called the problem of evil. It's very old. Philosophers continue to grapple with it. Various solutions of the problem have been proposed and discussed. The debate goes back and forth. I've participated in it over the years, so have many other philosophers. But let's leave God out of it. We're talking about human beings and their actions. No act performed by a human being has the capacity to cause the absence of pain. Therefore, according to U sub 2, no act is right. Notice what it says. An act is right if and only if it causes pleasure and the absence of pain. If no act causes the absence of pain, which seems true, then no act is right. And we can't accept that. We cannot accept any theory that implies that no act is right, because that's another way of saying everything we do is wrong. If we act at all and none of our actions are right, the only alternative is that everything we do is wrong. And that defeats the whole purpose of ethics. The whole purpose of ethics is to get a criterion of right action so that we can sort acts into two categories, those that are right and those that are wrong. If all acts are in the same category, the wrong category, then the whole exercise of doing ethics is pointless. So the problem with U sub 2 is that it has an unacceptable implication. It implies that no act is right, i.e., all acts are wrong. By the way, I'll put in a plug for my course. This coming fall, whether it's in the classroom or online, we don't know yet, but one way or another, I'll be teaching philosophy of religion, which I teach every other year and have for a long time. And the problem of evil is a very important part of that course. So if that's intriguing to you, if you'd like to learn more about the so-called problem of evil that I just quickly sketched for you, then you can enroll in that course. I think it's going to be limited to 30 students. So if you really need that course or want it, you need to enroll in it early while there's still room. Okay, we're almost done for the day. We're approaching 1 hour. The third formulation of act utilitarianism is called U sub 3. This one is going to try to improve upon U sub 2, which we just saw has problems. Here is U sub 3 from page 22. An act is right if and only if it causes pleasure and does not cause pain. So notice how, first of all, how U sub 3 differs from U sub 2 and why Feldman thinks it's an improvement. The problem with U sub 2 is that we were trying to find an act that causes there to be no pain. And no human act can do that or ever could do that. U sub 3 doesn't require that our actions cause no pain. It says that they not cause pain. It's ingenious, isn't it? Just changing some words around makes it a better theory. So U sub 3 says that in order for an act to be right, it has to satisfy two conditions. It has to cause pleasure. It doesn't say how much. Let's just say it has to cause some amount of pleasure. And it has to not cause any pain. That's promising. Are there any problems with it? Yes. It's not acceptable as it stands. It's still defective. Why? Well, Feldman says that some right acts do cause pain and some wrong acts cause pleasure but don't cause pain. So let's go over these acts and discuss them. The two acts that I have in mind are what Feldman calls the snakebite case on page 22 and the fossil case on page 23. Now, rather than go to my notes and read them to you, I'm going to give you just the short version, the gist of them. The snakebite case goes like this. Now, I'm going to maybe embellish it a little bit or deviate from it, but the basic facts are the same. You're hiking, let's say, with a friend. And you pause on the trail to take a drink or eat a snack. Just as you're standing there ready to take a drink, you'll notice a rattlesnake coiled and about to strike your friend on the leg. You, without saying a word, leap into action. You push your friend away from the snake in the hope of avoiding a snake bite. Unfortunately, when you did so, your friend was pushed into a cactus, causing painful thorn injuries. The snake did not bite your friend. That's good. Your act was successful in that regard. But incidentally, you caused some pain to your friend. Now, let's analyze this in terms of U sub 3. U sub 3 says that in order for an act to be right, it has to satisfy two conditions. It has to cause pleasure and not cause pain. Well, this act of yours did cause pain, right? The cactus needles into your friend's flesh. So, according to U sub 3, the act is wrong. Okay, you see that? It did cause pain. Go over to the other side of the words if and only if. Therefore, the act is not right, i.e., the act is wrong. Now, that's not an acceptable result, is it? I think intuitively, when I told you the story, you probably thought to yourself, oh, good, you did the right thing. Pushing your friend out of the way of the snake was the right thing to do in the circumstances. And yet, U sub 3 implies that you did the wrong thing. Why? Because you inflicted pain on your friend. And U sub 3 says that an act is right only if it doesn't inflict pain. So that's a problem, right? We've got a case where intuitively you did the right thing, and yet U sub 3 implies that you did the wrong thing. So U sub 3 clashes with our intuitions, our intuitive judgments of right and wrong. Now, there's another problem that's really the flip side of that one. It's called the fossil case. So let me give you the quick version. You've got a professor and a graduate student. The professor has spent a whole career searching for the missing link between two species. One day, while excavating, of course, the graduate student, who happens to be indebted to the professor is helping the student become a professor. The student and the student knows very much that the professor has devoted his or her career to searching for the missing link. One day, the student, while digging, comes across a little bone and immediately recognizes that that bone is from the missing link, the bird that constitutes the missing link. The student, you might guess, especially being indebted to the professor, would yell out, "Professor, I think I found something here that you may want to see." But no, the student who has happened to have lunch recently and who needs a toothpick uses the bone as a toothpick, and then when done with it, tosses it and never tells the professor. Okay, you're probably thinking intuitively, what a low down, dirty deed that is. That is the wrong thing to do. The graduate student acted wrongly. Okay, that's our intuitive judgment. Are you with me? What does U sub 3 say about that act of using the fossil as a toothpick and then throwing it away without telling the professor? Well, U sub 3 says an act is right if and only if it causes pleasure and does not cause pain. Those conditions are satisfied here, right? Using the toothpick for the fossil bone as a toothpick caused pleasure for the student, getting the meat out of the teeth, and it didn't cause anybody any pain because, as my mother used to say, what you don't know can't hurt you. By not even informing the professor that the bone had been discovered, the professor isn't hurt by it, harmed by it, disappointed, frustrated, angry, or anything else. So, according to U sub 3, the graduate student did the right thing because the graduate student performed an act that caused pleasure and did not cause any pain. Those are the two necessary conditions. They're also sufficient. Therefore, according to U sub 3, the graduate student did the right thing. And that goes against our intuitions. Right? A moment ago, when I told you the story, I assumed that, like me, you would say the graduate student did the wrong thing. But U3 implies that the graduate student did the right thing. So this theory has to be rejected because it's giving us the wrong results. It's giving us results that go against our firmly held beliefs. It's giving us results that go against our considered judgments, or what I'm calling intuitions. So when we meet again, first time next week, we're going to move on to the section entitled Utility. And I think that'll be enough. If we can get through that one section on our first lecture next week, we'll be in good shape, because the fourth lecture will be on the final section of the chapter. So when we meet again on our first lecture next week, we're going to discuss U sub 4, which is supposedly an improvement on U sub 3. We're going to move on to U sub 5, U sub 6, and finally U sub 7, which is the correct formulation. And then the following day next week, we'll discuss U sub 8 and U sub 9. Now I do have a handout. Let me show you. I have posted a handout already entitled, it's 2 pages long. I have mine printed front and back. The title is Act Utilitarianism, parenthesis, Feldman's Formulations. All I did is reproduce on one handout for you all 9 formulations from U sub 1 all the way to U sub 9. And in addition, I put in a little blurb after each one explaining what's wrong with that formulation, why it's defective. Of course, with U7, I didn't say it's defective because it's not defective. So I'm doing a little bit of the work for you. This is the kind of thing a good student would do. Now, if you want to get a good grade in a course, you've got to be on the ball. You've got to not only make good lecture notes, but you've got to prepare diagrams, write up handouts, summarizing things, prepare outlines. The sorts of things that I'm doing for you, you should be doing on your own. Because every handout you prepare, well, it wouldn't be a handout for you. Every list or summary or diagram that you draw helps you understand the material. And remember, if at any point you have a question about what Feldman says, about what I say on one of my handouts, or about something I've said on my video, you need to send me an email. That's our only way of communicating. I can talk to you through the video. You've got to talk to me via email. So I haven't gotten many emails. It's okay, I'm not hurt. I have plenty to do, but I am your teacher and I'm here to help you learn. So feel free to make use of email if you have questions, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Okay, that's enough for today. Sorry this lecture is a little bit late, but I did get the 2 lectures in for the week. Next week I'll try to get them up on Tuesday and Thursday. So have a great day. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and make sure you've finished reading chapter 2 by the first lecture next week. See you then.